Hey everyone, it's Richard again here at Calvin Wazoo, bringing you another video, and it's going to be on another Frank Zappa recording. However, it's going to be about a new bootleg that was recently released. Before I get started, I have a correction to make, and that is, if you know about my video about this CD set, I really made a boneheaded comment about the third CD, and that disc 3, I was saying that it was starting off from El Monte Legion Stadium. Well, no, it wasn't. Frank said, welcome to El Monte Legion Stadium, but he was just, being a joke. It clearly says, in the booklet that they were at the Santa Monica Civic Auditorium. So that was totally my blunder. Somebody pointed it out to me in a comment, and I was like, yeah, totally true. So just clarifying that it was not at El Monte Legion Stadium, but it was at the Santa Monica Civic Auditorium. And there was another comment too that kind of struck me as odd, because it was reacting to my comments about Zappa and his attitude toward bootlegs, and that he really hated them. He hated them because, and this box set sort of shows that that he often would perform live various pieces in development before he would put them on record. And in his mind, people were stealing that content from him by recording his shows. And sometimes they were doing that by absconding with the soundboard recording. And the comment's response was like, I was, why am I supporting this corporate attitude? And I'm like, what? Where does that come from? I'm not supporting any corporate attitude. I mean, I have probably close to 100 Zappa bootlegs. They're all on electronic files, on an external hard drive. I'm not taking the corporate side, beside the fact that with Zappa, he learned early on that he needed to be the owner of the publishing rights. And, he started his own record companies because he knew the record companies were going to rip him off. So, I can understand why he disliked bootlegs so much, because it was money directly out of his pocket, that people were profiting off his material before he had officially released it. But that doesn't mean that I support a corporate mentality about music publishing. You don't know me. You really don't know me. Anyway, that's aside there. This one, I'm going to be talking about this new bootleg that's been released on vinyl. All right, we got Zappa and the Mothers at the State Theater, 1974. State Farm Theater, 1974. I wanted to get this, and it's it's on red vinyl, two LPs. Limited edition. It says here I'm number 99 of 400, so limited pressing, I guess. Wasn't too awfully expensive, but the reason I wanted to get this in particular, because it was a 1974 show, and my first concert was to a Frank Zappa show. And that was about that time. I was thinking that it was in 1975 or it would have been the fall of 1974, because the summer of 1974, that's when I turned 16. So I would not have had a driver's license if it was any earlier than that, which meant that I could not drive myself to the show. And I had this recollection that I did drive myself to the show. I went alone, I know that. But I was thinking I drove myself. And as it turned out, I found, and I'll have the link to this in the Down Under, but I found, I had a site that was from my old days of blogging about Frank Zappa's catalog, particularly about bootlegs, which I'll mention some more about in a minute. So I went looking at this site that lists all of Zappa's concerts, verified, unverified, or whatever, going back to the 60s. And I went looking for the one that I attended at Ferris State College. It's now Ferris State University, but back then it was Ferris State College. And so that was, about this time. And it turns out that show, verified, was April 28th of 1974, which means I was 15 years old. So I didn't have my driver's license. I probably had a learner's permit, but that would not permit me to drive by myself at night. And I know my parents would not have let me go in that situation. So who knows? Maybe either my mom or dad drove me to the show and then picked me up. Because I do know I went alone, so I didn't go with anybody else. And I just really thought that I drove myself. But anyway, I remember, that show, and this lineup is pretty similar to what the lineup was. I mean, in terms of the musicians, the lineup at that particular show. This lineup includes Chester Thompson on drums, Frank, of course, George Duke and Napoleon Murphy Brock, and Ruth Underwood and Tom Fowler. But it does mention there's a card that goes in with this. It does mention that depending on the different dates and venues, other musicians would join them. And I remember that I think there was Bruce and Tom Fowler, and Napoleon Murphy Brock was there, George Duke was there, but I think it was Terry Bozzio that was on drums, because I remember them doing Titties and Beer, and the drummer coming out in a cape and whatnot, going through the whole rendition of Frank and him and the devil and all that. So I thought it was Terry Bozzio, and not Chester Thompson, because I don't know if Chester Thompson did that routine. And then I remember the guitar, though. The guitar that's on this cover. It was the guitar that Frank was playing that night. And it was a really great show. They played, at least now at the Big Rapids show, they played a lot of material from Overnight Sensation, from Apostrophe. They played a couple from, they played Inca Roads, and they might have played Andy from One Size Fits All. And I think they played a couple, early tunes or whatever. It was a very tight show. I do not remember a lot of random discussion, talking, in between songs or whatever. It was a very, very tight show. And for my first concert ever, it was just a wonderful experience. The songs in here, only a few I remember from the show I went to. It's a different set list for sure. So I'm gonna go through my reaction to this record, but I am gonna say from the beginning, don't buy it. This is a piece of crap bootleg. The sound, the balancing, I think it was probably a soundboard recording, but it's just really bad. You cannot hear Frank's guitar playing, hardly at all. There's only a couple spots in these two records where you can actually hear Frank play clearly, because the soundboard technician, and during the show a couple of times, Frank is telling him, hey, you need to turn down the cymbals, you need to turn down the snare, I can't tell what's going on up here. The sound mixing was, at the show was not optimal, and Frank was not pleased with that. And they're good. I mean, what you can hear of Frank's playing, the guitar solos are really, really good. But the other players and instruments are just completely drowned out. It never got balanced so that you could hear the guitar come forward. Right off the bat, you've got these solos on the first record side, on side one, for Penguin in Bondage, Inca Roads, and Stinkfoot. They all sound really bad because you cannot hear Zappa play. And in the show I saw, I know, he played Stinkfoot and he played Cosmic Debris. What else? Did he play anything else? I don't think he played anything else from Apostrophe. But, that was a long time ago. I was 15 years old, and I'm 62 now. But anyway, there was interesting during Penguin in Bondage. You could hear Napoleon Murphy Brock do some quotes from Willie the Pimp. And then we go into, there is a part in there where Frank is telling Brian about the monitor. He needs to check the balance on everything. Then let me pull out the cover here. So with side B, it's gonna start off with this song, Tamershi Duween, which is actually a really, really good song. Would have sounded better for sure if if you were there at the show. But it does sound pretty good on this record, although, there's no Frank solo in it, or if there was, you certainly couldn't hear it. Then it goes into the Dog Breath variations, which are really quite good, very, very excellent, and it quickly moves into the Uncle Meat variations, which are also, or that piece also was really played excellently by all the musicians. Then it follows up with a song called Building a Girl, which was really interesting. And this was probably one of those times when they had other musicians than who are identified on the release, because there's a flute player during this song. I was listening to it and I was thinking, is this something that George Duke is doing with the keyboards? No, it was a flute player. And then we've got Florentine Pogan. So, and Napoleon Murphy Brock is just sassy and flawless in this. But hey, you can't hear any guitar. Now, maybe Frank is conducting for most of this song, because Florentine Pogan isn't necessarily that well known in my recollection for having a guitar solo. But there was one at the end, but it was, again, barely audible. And there was a lot of sibilation in the recording that was kind of annoying. And then it goes into Montana, which has a quote buried in there from Big Swifty. And of course, Montana, on the studio release of Overnight Sensation just has a blistering guitar solo. And again, you just can't hear it on this recording. It is played at a somewhat faster pace than what is on than on Overnight Sensation. And it was also faster than what I remember. They played it when I saw them at Ferris. They played a slower style that was more akin to the studio recording. So we go into side C, and then which opens with the Booger Man, which includes the hook at the beginning, and then there's a quote in there, interesting quote of Miles Davis, "Straight no chaser." I kind of remember this maybe from the show that I saw back in '74, because they did do something that kind of began with George Duke doing some weird rambling and a tiny little cymbal, banging on that. Seems like I remember that. And then it kind of eventually it settles into a really, really smooth groove. And then Ruth Underwood is playing bells or chimes, and that's where the quote for "Straight no chaser" comes up. Dupree's Paradise follows that, and there's a great bass solo in that, and there's also a guitar solo again toward the end, but it's only audible. You can only really hear it when Frank is starting the solo because nobody else is playing, essentially, or they're playing, very, very quietly. But as soon as the guitar solo begins to build up and George Duke starts to play, then you can't hear the guitar solo anymore. And it's a really nice guitar solo. Very delicate style playing that Frank is doing, that he builds up into a soaring shred. And then that finishes like it's the end of the concert, because Frank makes this announcement that somebody's turned the power off or is turning it down. So he's saying goodnight to everybody and introducing the people there in the band. And then he says, "And some asshole backstage turning the power off." So Frank wasn't very pleased about that. By the way, though, through all this, one thing you can hear are the drums. And Chester Thompson is pretty fucking good on the drums during this show. Now, side D, I don't know if they got back on stage if this is an encore or if it was some other part of the show that was snipped out and then, put at the start of side D. Starts with Camarillo Brillo. And the sound mixing is just all over the place. Again, it's not really very good. They go into a version of Trouble Every Day, which is good, but the same problem. You cannot hear Frank's guitar solo. It's just barely audible. And then it finishes with a bonus track of King Kong that was recorded at the Fifth Dimension in Ann Arbor, Michigan on December 3rd, 1967. So this show from 1974, and then they throw in at the end. Interestingly, it sounds like an audience recording and not a soundboard recording, and which actually makes it sound better than the rest of this album. Even, it's still, it's muffled. It's not really that clear, but everything is even. You can hear all the instruments. All right. So nothing is getting buried or overwhelmed by anything else. So in that sense, this last track on this double LP is probably the best one. And it's probably someone in the audience It kind of sounds like that to me anyway. Great organ playing in this, and I'm thinking because it was 1967 that it was probably Don Preston, and Bunk Gardner was probably playing sax, and great saxophone solo going in there. King Kong is just an awesome song. I am going to guess that it was Billy Monday who was playing drums, and that it was not Jimmy Carl Black. This was this recording of King Kong was from, as I said, December of 1967, and he was in. At first, I kind of thought maybe it was Art Tripp, but no. Billy Monday was still in the band, doing most of the drumming up until January of January of 68. So I'm thinking, yeah, it was probably him doing the drums. Incidentally, when he did leave the Mothers, Billy Monday went on to form the supergroup Rhinoceros. And Zappa shreds on the guitar solo. And you can hear it, as I said, because it's an audience recording, so there's no problem with the balance between anything. They're all equal. They all sound equal in terms that everything sounds like it's being played through a blanket, but you can still hear everything. And it's as I say, a really, really shredding guitar solo. So, yeah, don't waste your money on this one. And it's not like I'm being, I have no experience with it. It's not like I do not have experience with bootlegs. I do, as I said. I have probably 100 Zappa bootlegs, many of which I have blogged about years ago when I had a blog. And a lot of them sounded really, really good, and I made mention of that. I mean, the Palladium 1981 Halloween early show, I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. The Halloween 1978 show at the Palladium, I gave 4.5 stars to. But the Felt Forum late show from 1976, that one I gave 2 stars to because it was a really crappy recording. But then again, the Trick or Treat from London, 1968, that one I gave 4 stars to. And one of the really, really excellent ones that I did write about was from Binghamton, New York, the St. Patrick's Day show from 1988. That was another 4-star review that I gave. But yeah, there were some duds, and because they sounded awful, and I dinged them like that. I mean, even the bootleg The Weasel Music, which was taken from a FLAC file and was from 1969, I gave that 4 stars because even that sounded, really good. So, yeah, it's not lying, in the Deutschlandhalle in Berlin, 1978, I gave that one 4 stars, so there are really great bootleg recordings out there. But then again, there are also some really, really bad ones. So it's, as I said, it's not like I'm not experienced listening to them. So when it comes to this one, my recommendation is, there's the backside. The recommendation is don't bother. Unless you are an absolute completist, where you're OCD and you have to own everything. Don't spend your money on this. It's not that expensive, but it's nowhere near worth the money to pay for it. Just skip it. So those links to where you can look up concerts and venues, I'll have in the down under. Please like and share the video. Leave a comment. Were you at the 1974 show that I was talking about at Ferris State College? You know, we're talking April 28th, 1974. It would be very cool, you know, to hear from somebody who was also at that show. So leave a comment. And please remember, when you're listening to your music, please remember to always enjoy your music.